one and only Dr. Sue Rubin, and who is the guest speaker, guest conversationalist with me today. I'm going to ask her to turn her camera on there. And it's many of you know Dr. Sue, and but for those of you that don't, yesterday someone had called me to find out about our church, our community, and what was going on and who we have. And I said, oh, and tomorrow I'm going to have a conversation with Dr. Sue. And the woman goes, well, who is Dr. Sue? And I said, she is an icon in this teaching. That's who she is. She has been a groundbreaker in so many ways, both literally, physically breaking ground in new church environments, but most importantly in teaching thousands of people of how to use this teaching in a way to impact life in such a new way. And she's just filled with zest and vigor and fun and clarity and purpose, and it's just a being of love and light. Dr. Sue Rubin.
That's me. Oh my God. But it's really, I am as me. Thank you, my beloved friend Keith, and all my friends at LA and far beyond. And so it's a great joy to be home again.
Well, it's such a great joy to have you home again. The As we talked about, we're looking at the 4 chapters of the teaching of the science of mind this month, which is the cornerstone, if you will, of this philosophy, faith, and way of life. And as I had shared with you before, the first Sunday, and for those of you that didn't see it, you can find it on our website and our YouTube channel. First Sunday, I talked about spontaneity and how important it is to be open to the spontaneous nature of spirit within us. And last Sunday, I talked about the thing itself, that thing within us, that life force, that power, the essence of all there is. And this week we move into the chapter titled The Way It Works. I'd love to hear from you, Dr. Sue, just right off the cuff, how you would explain the way it works.
The way it works is for us by working through us, and so it is. However, there's a little more to it in that. And it's such an interesting concept in its simplicity, and yet in the ways that we tend to confuse the issue. If indeed you and I and all that is based on the first principle of life, the very animating principle of being, you can call it intelligence, you can call it universal mind, radiant spirit. I choose to call it God. It simplifies it for me after taking a very circuitous route to that essence of being that is divine. And to know that at my core, at your core, the core of everyone, of everything, there is this abstract, unseen presence and power of love and law. And those really are the two, but really one interactive principles of life. And somehow I am the initiator for all of the activity that ensues. Everything that's going on within the world globally is a reflection of something within myself that I personally, and then all of us collectively, have set in motion. And yet the always bright light that you were tangibly lighting at the start of the service is that spark of the divine that is always available to be accessed and is being accessed, however, in degrees of my awakening to it. Mm-hmm. But it's always working for, through, and as me. Nothing that happens and shows up in my physical experience is divorced or separate from something that I have thought, believed, consistently placed my attention on, knowingly or unknowingly. And that's why we hear God works for me by working through me.
I love how you reference the light, because just lighting the candle is an example of how we oftentimes think the light isn't there, mm-hmm. right? And yet it is always there. And it's by adding the spark to it that the light shows up. The light doesn't become new. It just shows up, right? It's the essence of everything that is required for that light to make itself known. All was required was the spark, right? And so when it's working, the power then works. So the same power that causes that candle to become a flame is the same power within you and me that gives us the opportunity to know more of ourselves, to express more of it, right? And so we're not creating that power, we're revealing it.
Yes.
And I love that. And that, um, I oftentimes say that that then absolves us of a great responsibility of feeling the need that we have to create our good. Now, it doesn't absolve us of our responsibility to be a co-creator in that, to play our role in the creation of that. But it's not a job. It's not a job that's a soul SOLE job, but it's definitely a job of the soul SOUL. Right, and so it's understanding that it's part of that dance with the divine, right, and to also understand that I'll speak for myself, the remembrance of the remembrance, that the definition of the way it works isn't finite. The power is infinite, as is my definition, meaning it's up to me for that to evolve into a higher understanding of all times. That doesn't mean make it more complex. In fact, it's actually getting rid of the complexities and moving towards the simplicity of it all.
Yes. You know, when you mention light, and particularly with what happened to the temple yesterday, in every temple, in every synagogue, there is what is called the Ner Tamid. It
Mm-hmm.
is the light that is always kept burning. Now, do we always see it? No. And that really is so symbolic to me of the fact that I can walk in, using that as a metaphor, to a temple. And
Mm-hmm.
if I'm not aware that somewhere, perhaps beyond my physical gaze at the moment, there is a light hidden, perhaps with the Torah behind what can be seen. And yet, if I don't know it's there, it is non existent. That is the light of the divine within us.
Mm-hmm.
And whether I know it or not, it still exists. But my discovery of it, my awakening to its presence, suddenly changes everything to know I am in the midst of an invisible essence of being, a
Mm-hmm.
light, a love, a, a purpose that really holds itself waiting for me to say, aha,
Right.
those are those moments, you know?
Right.
And so it's so true that unless I'm aware of something, it can exist, but beyond my recognition of its existence.
Mm-hmm. I love that. The In the book, it
Mhm.
says that the life which we live is the universal life expressing through us. Else, how could we live? Our thought and emotion is the use we make, consciously or unconsciously, of this original creative thing that is the cause of everything. That's what you're saying, right?
Right.
That's exactly what you're saying. So then, what would be a great practice, that's a new practice for us potentially, to become more aware of the light in life? Because I think we're
So
at a point in this teaching, and all of us, to let go of the activity of it being rote and being open to the spontaneous nature.
mhm. So, you know, in that particular chapter, and I must say, I have not revisited the textbook very often. So to go through that ritual of those first 63 pages, I mean, anyone picking up that Science of Mind textbook, that's it. That's the essence of it.
Yes.
So to me, there was something about treatment because that chapter or that segment is very much about utilizing the definite, specific way of conjuring within our own minds the realization that there is something I can call upon. And treatment, spiritual mind treatment, I don't know that I've ever been partial to that. It just seems so distant from the practicality of life. And yet, when I think more about it, I realize what I'm doing is treating my mind humanly to a spiritual truth
Mm-hmm.
that includes yet transcends that realization, you
Right.
know? So for me, treatment, which is simply conscious recognition and oneness, inseparable, indivisible oneness with, that which is, this divinity,
Right.
this infinitude, this universal self is my purpose, to consciously keep unlearning what has been false and really isolated by you're not enough, or you're not good, or you have erred, therefore you're merely human. But remembering that to err is human, to forgive is divine.
Mhm.
So all of the qualities that God is, I am, you are, everyone is.
So, when you say treatment, for those that this may be a new term for, in the teachings of the science of mind, there's a tool that Dr. Ernest Holmes created called spiritual mind treatment. It's the form of prayer in this philosophy, faith, and way of life, and it's a mental alignment to a spiritual truth, and it's done in an affirmative way, not in a state of supplication. And so that's what you're speaking of, right? So it's using our mind in a way to align ourselves with what is spiritual truth, right? And by speaking that, if at all possible to speak it, then that then moves from conscious mind into our subconscious mind, where the law of life responds to that and then brings forth an experience in life, right?
Yes.
That's the essence of how that works. The way that he addresses that in this chapter is he talks about it in the context of we're being a gardener. The way that we use our mind is planting seeds, and seeds of that which we desire to experience, which oftentimes are also seeds of that which we choose to rid ourselves of, right? Because in old school treatment, there was a step of ridding
Yeah.
yourself, and then it got fine-tuned down to just the affirmation alone. But he writes, the gardener goes forth in faith to sow their seeds. He say, but I'm going to do this in more of a gender neutral. They have learned that as they sow, so shall they reap, that the law works for all alike. We must accustom ourselves to the concept of the impersonalness of the law, the availability of the law, and the mechanical accuracy of the law. If we can conceive only a little good, that is as much as we can experience.
Yes. So God, greater good, putting it in more practical terms,
Mm-hmm.
is always available. However, that good will only reveal itself in my world through a sense of peace, through a more harmonious connection with the people in my world. If I truly have a conviction that this is possible. However, for most of us, using that concept of recognizing this quote unquote higher power of our own understanding and then unifying with it, if I am keeping it apart from me, which in all truth, growing up in the Jewish faith, I had the sense there was a God, a greater good, but not necessarily right within me, through me, and around me, more externally located. So if I believe in God as being this good, and I know I am therefore that good because I contain its essence, then my affirmation of that helps. So a life situation, I'm frightened, I'm anxious, I'm uncertain about the future. Anybody? As
Mm-hmm.
Tom Johnson used to raise his hand. Anybody
The great
agree?
Tom Johnson, yes. I love it.
And so, yes, we all, to whatever degree we acknowledge it or allow for that feeling to be present with us, are afraid. I'm always affirming something because that power is always working through me, whether I know it or not, but it works more effectively, harmoniously,
Mm-hmm.
and wholesomely when I know it. So I can say I'm afraid, and that stream of thinking will convince me that that's a valid way to feel. Everything is going on to contribute to that. If I let that go, then that's all I know at the moment. However, if I say I'm afraid and simply acknowledge and then move on to say, however, I know there is that within me, which even though rationally I may not really get it, it's greater than I am. It includes and yet is greater than what I'm presently humanly feeling. What is it greater as? As a sense of peace and faith and conviction that somehow, somewhere, the more I can work within my own mental and emotional atmosphere and know good is available, but only as much as I can agree to accept is all that I will feel. So if immediately that coin is switched and it's back to, yeah, but I have every reason, more reason to be afraid and uncertain than to feel solid and convinced that God is, I am. To me, those four words sum up the whole thing. Number one, if God is, that means all good is. And when I say I am, I'm acknowledging that somewhere at the depth of my being, I am that which it is.
I agree. I love that. And I think it also is important for us to remember that in those moments of fear, that's our humanness coming out, to listen to that, to acknowledge it, see if there's something for us to be guided to or through with that, and also be open to a higher idea, to know that that higher idea already exists by means of the power. We know that's true, right? That's the God is I am. And then the next piece to that is to remember, and I often hear Robert Bitzer saying this, the principle of life is not bound by precedent, right? So if we've ever used this power in a way to create a shift in our lives, that power is there again. It's not like it happened and then it's extinguished. It's always there. So it's not bound by precedent. All that is being called of us is to be willing to move to a higher idea around it, right? In the book, it talks about evolution, which I think is one of the things we're all called to move into, which is a state of evolutionary thinking, right? Of conscious evolution. And it says, but it's important to remember that evolution is seen to follow involution,
Yes.
wherein we discover that our minds are stargates, our bodies cells of mysteries that give us the keys to the emerging phase of our existence. And so I love that because I think I see it as almost a trinity where it's important for us to remember that our minds are stargates, our bodies are cells of mysteries, not just our bodies, but the bodies, right, of life itself. But all of that, while understanding that evolution is a result of involution, that then gives us the key to our emerging phase of existence. In other words, calling us to a higher idea of knowing why we are here.
Yes. May I draw from a personal
Sure, would
experience,
love that.
which I posted on Facebook on my page. The other night, it was 6:30. I had just done a little bit of marketing, buying food, and had parked my car somewhat of a distance away from my destination in a large shopping area. And when I got to my car, a woman approached me and asked, "Could you do me a favor? Big story. Someone was supposed to pick me up here. We're staying at the Four Seasons locally. Could you take me back to my car?" So there I am, dark parking lot, this woman and I standing there. And I could feel physically, I moved back from her because
Mhm.
I just had that sense, that indicated that this could be fine. On the other hand, maybe it's not. What to do? So I went inside for just a moment to give myself pause to think. And for me, my anchor is God is I am. So she said, "Would you please do that? Really, it's fine. You're a woman. I'm a woman. We're not kids. It's okay. You're masked. I'm masked." I said, "I am so sorry, but I cannot do that. I just find myself not willing to do that, but I know." And here's where spirit or that higher knowing comes in. But I know that somehow you safely find your way back to wherever you're headed. And I saw her start to move closer and kind of revving up to give further
Mhm.
entreaty or to ask. But by that time, this thing had kicked in, the fear combined with, "I go my way in peace and in safety, and I free you to go your way in peace and safety." So I just opened the door, got in the car, uh, turned on the ignition, made sure she wasn't like in back of me, and headed out. But there's how fear faces us every moment when we're being honest. And
Right.
most definitely, that's a signal, whether
Right.
fear to flight, or just fear to know, let me gather my inner stronger divine momentum and see what is it about and act accordingly. And
Right.
that's not always a mealy mouth, sure, of course, yeah, be happy to.
No, it's quite the opposite. I had a situation yesterday, a little bit, not that, but it's one. But so then the question I want to ask you is, so after that experience,
Mhm.
how did you feel for the next few hours?
In question, was she
Right.
really perfectly
Because that's
valid?
how I was. I tossed and turned last night
Yes,
about the situation was
yes.
in question. Yes.
And therein lies the rub. The human wants that usual state of everyday awareness to get in and stay in, to get a
Right.
strong, solid foothold or mind hold, more accurately. And yet, in the rummaging through my thoughts, I came to the conclusion, I don't know. Yes, she
Right.
could have been perfectly valid and safe, and all would be well. On
Right.
the other hand, I did what the moment demanded of me to do. That's why you'll hear sometimes the expression consciousness on demand. Well, what am I being conscious of? I choose to be conscious of, beyond the doubt and fear, the certainty that God is, I am. And even if that choice could have been different, for me, it couldn't have been different.
Right. And so you say, when the consciousness on demand, he writes right here in the book, when the consciousness speaks, the law receives and executes.
Hmm.
Right? When a farmer plants a seed, he invokes the law. Remember, involution, right, is the causation to evolution, right?
Yes.
So when you surrendered, when I did yesterday in the situation I was in, because I just said to this individual, I'm not going to fight with you. That's what you want. I've stated
Mm-hmm.
my piece.
Mm-hmm.
I came in peace, right? What you're doing is wrong, and wronging others on the street. I'm like, and I'm going to walk away, and I did, as she was screaming and carrying on. But what I needed to remember, and I'm sure same for you as well, is that when we listened to consciousness and we spoke, we don't have to stay immersed in that idea because the law is doing its thing, right?
Yes.
So, and if we believe that a higher idea is making itself known, it's making itself known, right?
Yes.
As we move on, it's making itself known. Now, we don't play a role as to how it's received for anyone else in that moment,
Mm-hmm.
right? The only thing that we can have power in, if you will, is if we receive it for ourselves.
Yes. So when you're talking involution as cause and evolution as effect, what does
Right,
that mean? It means first I must involve my thoughts, my beliefs, my attention and awareness on my choice, what you started saying at the very beginning
right,
today, that I choose to know the highest that I can
right.
know, that is a benefit, not just to me, but again, that sense of unity has to start evolving
Hmm.
into knowing what's good for me, honestly and authentically, is
Right,
good for everyone.
right,
It's a basic knowing.
right,
So, the lessons go on and go on they will. It's almost like the universe is playing a cosmic tit for tat. Have you got it, folks? Did you get clear? Oh, no? Okay, we'll have a little more of this or
right.
that.
And then no matter where we're at on the journey of our life, we're also here to continue to fine tune our consciousness, right?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
It says in the book from Gene Houston, in the book, The Science of Mind, in the foreword, the science of mind offers us the passion for a new possibility,
Mm,
along with the precise and clear directions for building a new matrix of mind and manifestation. You know, I have learned to have a new relationship with the word manifestation.
mhm,
Um, I feel like I'm anchored down oftentimes with the old idea of manifestation. I was like, if I think so and so, I'll create so and so. If I set my goals, I'll experience this. That all is true. And at the same time, manifestation is just simply the external experience of my state of awareness, right?
mhm.
And
Yes.
so I like to look at it more as a very fluid experience of the creation of life. not excluding the parking space or excluding the money or excluding any of that, right? But look at it more as I evolve, right? Then I'm more in the flow of creation. Therefore, everything that's coming that shows up in form for me is a manifestation of my awareness and participation in my divinity.
Yes. So always it comes back to the simplicity of God or infinite good is to me what I feel truly and deeply about myself. Am I good enough?
Right.
Am I smart enough and kind enough and generous and creative enough? And if not, then that will reflect back. It's an inevitability that the law must only return to me that which I have given. And it's such a nebulous, abstract, that I think that's what we really grapple with. You know, it's easy, as in the Eastern traditions, to have a guru,
Uh-huh.
someone who becomes the representation of the divine. And yet that becomes confusing too, where that becomes an objective adoration, not just subjective. We're being asked to go to this invisible place and space within, know that beyond everything you've experienced, good, bad, or indifferent, there's only been good. That's all this singular first principle of life knows is goodness. And the more that I can wind my way into knowing, and I am essentially that good, even when I'm being a jerk, even when later I may reflect that you could have done it better, more
Yeah.
artfully. Of course I could have. But still, that does not alter the changeless permanence of the divine presence, which always is infinite, primal goodness.
That is so beautiful and also such a really, really, really big idea in its simplicity, but it's still a big idea to open up to believing and knowing that it's all good showing up as goodness.
Yes.
Right? That's a big idea. That's
Yes.
one that is garnering and calling for each of us to evolve into a higher acceptance of that.
Yes.
It really is. I believe that
I
about stepping into that spiritual truth and then letting the way it work do its thing through us, right?
yes.
And see what shows up as a manifestation.
You know, when you think back to the origin, perhaps of all of our searches for spirituality, it first came as personal development. Remember back in the
Right.
day? And yet it talked about self esteem, that
Hmm.
until and unless I can esteem myself with all my flaws and admit it, kind and compassionate, admit it, errors, I can't have anything else in life other than what I feel. I think what's changed is in the spiritual perception of that, that the self-esteem, the little lowercase s, has become now the same principle, self-esteem, but
Right.
it's now a divine appreciation for who I am that is unaltered by my flaws and frailties. Yeah, it's a beautiful thing and not easy, you
Right.
know,
And
simple.
also, it's one that's called for through evolution. And it's also one that oftentimes is confusing to those that are not part of this philosophy, faith, way in
Yeah.
life, because they think that I will speak that there have been times that I have people say to me, their perception of when I'm taking care of myself, my
Hmm.
self esteem, uppercase and lowercase s, then therefore I am being selfish because I'm
Hmm.
not doing what they want me to do. Right?
Yes.
Much
Yeah.
like the woman in the parking lot, right? Where, and I've counseled clients before, I've said, well, let's flip that. You're actually not being selfish, you're being self aware. And
Hmm.
it's out of that self awareness, right? Remember, awareness is really what we're seeking here, a constant evolution. Deepak Chopra says all there is awareness, right? It's through
Yes.
the awareness of the self that we then give ourselves the opportunity to actually evolve to a higher framework of mind,
Yes.
right? Where we can then also check in what's our intention in the process. A lot of it has to do with what is our intention. Um,
And therein, may I just put in a plug for spiritual practices?
right,
Because how do you get to Carnegie Hall? You know,
right,
that old practice. How do I attain the deeper conviction and embodiment of that, the idea that God works for me by working through me? I've got to meditate. I've got to do the affirmative prayers that place me consciously in oneness with the one. And over time, that proves itself. And as haphazard or erratic as we are in our practices, that's how erratic life shows up. One moment
Exactly.
good, one moment bad, so to
Exactly.
speak.
Exactly.
So
So the closing quote that I'm going to use for us to continue the conversation is from the Forward with Gene Houston, and it's a quote that I just love, and I use it every year, and I want to get your take on it because I think it's such a directive for each of us. And she says, "The science of mind shows us how to activate the constructive imagination and how to hold in thought and feeling the intention and energy for healing, holding, and co-creation."
imagination. What can I imagine beyond what I'm experiencing, beyond what I have experienced? Again, while including that as a richness of my humanity, and yet take it to the next level,
Right.
take it to a point with what the world needs now as never before is the simplicity of a mindful, self-compassionate and compassionate perception of others, so that my judgment isn't as snap as
Hmm.
it's been. My jump to conclusions isn't as readily available, that there is this fine tuning and pruning and calming and quieting where I can take that moment before I want to slap you and just again find my own anchor. God is I am. Take a deep breath. Gene Houston is famous for saying, use not only your inner sense and awareness of this infinite good, but attach it to its physical counterpart so that the breath, deep in, deep out, as again you practiced at the
Right.
start, reminds me that it's God in, I'm the in breath, I am. And whatever I am, and I aming, it is going to come back to me for greater good. I know.
Whatever I aming. Well,
Yeah.
I just love that you said tuning, fine tuning, and pruning. I
Yeah.
love the pruning part.
Oh my
That's not
God.
pruning as in the dried up fruit. It's pruning as
No, 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 no.
clipping off the dead leaves. Yes.
Yes, which I must do with my roses.
So, Sue, is there anything else you would like to say right now?
Just, I am so delighted to interact with you. It is always evocative and provocative and exciting and causes me to go deeper, think bigger, and to know that ah, life really is good. And this is my remembrance, my reminder. And it can be that way for everyone, just take it beyond the science of mind, which one of those chapters specifies, and remind yourself this is the science of mind and spirit,
Right. Right.
love and law. I've got to love the essence of who I am and then launch it out
Yeah.
beyond.
Well,
As
Holmes tells us the great love of the universe must be one with the great law of its own being, right? And
yes,
that's us. Yes.
yes.
Um, well, thank you so very much. It's always such a delight and such a pleasure, and so um, it's evocative, as you were saying, just to play with you in this inner realm of mind and space and thought, and bringing us back to the simplicity of it all.